an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magician's Apprentice, chapters 19, 20, 21, and 22. In these chapters, Hanara has gone back to Takato, and I can't help but side-eye the way his chapter starts, where he says things hadn't gone as badly as he'd feared, considering Takato slaughtered an entire village full of people. Also, Tessia gets an opportunity to show off her skills a little bit, and, like many women, instinctively talks down how much skill she has immediately afterward. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. I was not ready when I checked the schedule and I saw that I had another one because I just recorded on this book on Wednesday. Was it Wednesday? But anyway, 2 in 1 week. And I always kind of like when that happens because it feels really fresh and it just feels almost more like normally reading a book, you know? So, yeah, this next chapter, 19, as I said, nothing had worked out quite as he'd expected or as he'd feared. And I know what Hanara means when he thinks this, is I wasn't killed or tortured or punished, really. But there's no good way to hear that from my perspective after what Takato did. You know, like, I really do try and have sympathy for the fact that, like, he is trying to save his own skin, but saying it wasn't what I'd feared when, like, at least 100 people lived in that village, right? Maybe less. Maybe we could say 50 people. I don't really have a clear idea on that, but nevertheless, I can't help but think less of Hanara at this point. You know, I want to have sympathy, and I do to a point, but I cannot respect somebody who lets that many people die so that they themselves will be okay. It's just, even if it's just one other person, and it's like me or you, that I can get. I understand how that would work. I can't say that if I were in a situation where it was me or someone else, that I would for sure do the honorable thing and die instead. I don't really think I have that in me. But if I were being told that an entire town was going to be killed or had been killed, I just can't imagine that I'd be like, well, it wasn't so bad. Like, what? So he comes back to Takato, all expecting that there's going to be some sort of punishment, some sort of repercussion for having avoided the signal as long as he had. And instead, Takato is kind of like delighted at the fact that Hanara came back at all. I think he really was wondering at that point whether or not Hanara had just decided that freedom was enough to die for. And once he realizes that Hanara is willing to give up on that freedom to come back to him, he says something about, like, admit it, you like being my slave. And later on, there is a moment in which Hanara is carrying Takato's things up a mountain, and he's thinking about how easy the work had been when he was, working at Dakin's estate. And in some ways that was better. But the familiarity of being back with Takato and knowing exactly his place and what's expected of him is comforting in its way. And that's exactly what I feel like a lot of people don't really understand about going back to abusers. Women who return to men who abuse them, or children who are still weirdly loyal with parents who were terrible to them. Or, for example, women who have been pimped out and are bizarrely loyal to the person who has been profiting off of their exploitation. And it's a psychological thing that, like, we go back to what's familiar to us, even if that familiar thing is unhealthy. And that is what people going back to somebody who is abusive to them is simply the behavior of all human beings in many other aspects of our lives writ large. You know, how many people know smoking's bad for them and they still smoke? How many people know that sitting down and eating an entire bag of Cheetos is terrible for them, but they still do it? Hi, waving, hello. How many people know if they have these extra 2 shots of tequila, they're going to feel like shit tomorrow? And probably this is a bad thing for them to continually do, like 3 times a week. And yet, we get something out of it. And we keep doing it, even though overall, it's a bad choice. It's bad for us in a variety of ways. But we continue to go and do this really unhealthy, terrible thing. And it's kind of funny when you think about how many of us are baffled by somebody going back to an abusive relationship. And we're just like, I just don't understand why you wouldn't get out of there. Meanwhile, they are able to not drink because they know it won't feel good. They are able to not overeat. They are able to XYZ, and that is no problem for them because we each have our thing that we choose to abuse ourselves with, you know, and they have chosen this relationship. And so it's one of those that we all act really mystified, but we do exactly the same thing just in a different area of our lives, and that different context makes us think that we have nothing in common with that person or that person's choices. And we do, frankly. We all have something in common with it. None of us makes decisions that are really healthy for us all the time. And honestly, in some ways, if you are making always really, really healthy decisions, that can be its own problem. Depending on how that is treated and how you mentally handle that sort of thing. So Hanara is more, it says Hanara had been shocked and puzzled when Tokado attacked the village. It's not like he's horrified, shocked, but that's kind of not really at all the verb that I wanted or adjective that I wanted. Hanara looked up at the men sitting around the fire and felt his empty stomach sour. Ichani, exiles and outcasts, company unworthy of his master who owned land and was a respected Ashaki. Again, yikes, right? Unworthy of his master. And I know that he really means this in the most factual of terms. Tokado is at a certain status in society that should not be associating with people of this ilk. And to a degree, saying unworthy is not even meant to be his opinion or him honoring his master in his mind. It's genuinely meant to be a statement of fact. But it is really hard to read that and not feel like Hanara buys it and does feel that way. So, Tokado. At one point, Hanara's thinking about it. Hanara felt a thrill of both fear and relief. He never felt safe around other Shachakan masters if Tokado was not present. Yet he also feared Tokado. His master had not yet punished him for ignoring the signal for so long. He might yet do so. He might yet have plans to kill Hanara or send him to his death. Hanara would have assumed Tokado had not killed him because he needed a source slave if his master hadn't returned to Kirelia with a new source slave. He looked back at the thin young man waiting by Tokado's tent. Jakara hadn't said a word to Hanara, but his unfriendly stares made it clear he had not expected to be sharing his role with his predecessor. So, this is an interesting thing. I really never thought about rivalry between slaves. I've always thought about rivalry between servants because there is a sort of like, in my mind, potential for stepping upward in the hierarchy, because servants have definitely got hierarchies. You know, we've got the steward of the household who's pretty much in charge of everything. We'll have like the head housekeeper or housemaid, and then she will be in charge of other housemaids. We'll have the cook who's in charge of the entire kitchen. There are positions that you can aspire to. And I always felt like slaves are slaves, but of course people create hierarchies anywhere. So it makes total sense that these two would still rival one another for a position of favor, because they're going to be treated differently by their master, and they're aware of that. So yeah, I never thought about it, but it makes total sense. And I'm kind of interested in what this is, because I think this is really smart of the author. Rather than just having Hanara just be Takado's slave and there be other slaves and they all serve different masters, and have that be sort of flat, giving Takado two servants who are trying to sort of outdo one another, that makes things a little, there's more texture there. There's more potential too, you know? I don't know. I like this. Ashleigh's in the chat. Sorry I'm late. No problem, Ashleigh. And Martin says, I think you're putting too much blame on Hanara. He's been tortured and abused for decades. I'm not trying to blame him for what happened, Martin. I'm not saying like, you know, I'm saying that the fact that he's not thinking, oh, wow, this is horrific. He killed an entire village full of people. Instead, he's just like, wow, I didn't expect that, but things could have gone worse. I'm just like, good God, dude. You know, like that is, I'm judging him more for how little he seems to value the lives of other people. And I understand that this is a self-preservation tactic on his part, coming back to Takado, and I don't really blame him for going back. But it, like, the way that he is thinking about everything is really, like, upsetting to me. So Takado is, like, talking to everybody who are apparently going to other villages, or at the very least, like, little settlements, households, and raiding them and killing people and taking their power. And when I say power, I don't mean magical power. I just mean their life force energy, you know. And they're doing this to enhance their own power. And DeCito is one of the guys who comes back, and he's asked, like, how did it go? And the answer is that it was an easy target. They're all easy targets. Some are easier than others. And Takado's like, we could take a quarter of this country for ourselves with no real resistance. No immediate resistance, that is. And they're asking, okay, so we could take it. Could we hold on to it? And what Takado is saying, it comes down to, they're going to have to do this flawlessly in order to convince the Sachakan emperor that an alliance with the people who have decided to kind of go against his wishes is the more expeditious route to take. Essentially, they need to position themselves with such strength that they attract other allies first, and then the emperor sort of is forced into a corner and has to also support them, because he recognizes that going against them is going to look bad and lose himself allies. Because this is, you know, we're looking at a country full of people that could potentially be parceled out and increase the holdings and wealth of other people. And whether it's against the law or not, people want what they want. They want power. They want wealth. They want to expand their rulership. And that's for certain what these people see it as. You know, it's because of the fact that we're talking about slaves and masters, it's not just like the way that lays work, where you are giving a portion of your work to your lord, but you also manage to sort of create a life for yourself on your terms, everything that would be on that piece of land would belong to them. And Takato also points out, and I didn't really talk about this last episode, but when Daikon goes and meets with the king, and the king expresses his frustration at the fact that he can't really take sides regarding the circle of friends because he needs to make sure that nobody feels favored when the shit goes down, so that they will all actually unify the way that they need to in order to defend Kyralia. He offers to spar with Daikon during this conversation. And Daikon tells him that he would be a bad partner, and the king thinks that he's just kind of being like, reluctant. And Daikon has to clarify, like, dude, I've literally never picked up a sword. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And the king is sort of blindsided by that, but doesn't seem as concerned as he should. And says something like, well, so you just fight with magic? What happens if magic runs out? Which we know can happen. That's literally why magicians in Kyralia have apprentices. It's why these Ichani have slaves, to draw power off of them, because power is finite. So the king is asking a very reasonable question in what happens if your magic runs out. And Daikon pretty much is just like, we just have to hope that doesn't happen. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys are not prepared. And the fact that you are even wondering, like, the whole reason for the meeting between the two of them is because they suspect that some shit might go down any day now with T'Chaka. This is why they're talking, and yet there is no sense of urgency or real understanding of what this could come down to. There isn't any feeling of, like, maybe we should prepare in every aspect of our lives. It's just, well, I guess I'll die. Holy shit. Daikon, buddy, all you and your friends need to sit down and find somebody to train you in actual combat, because that's what it may come down to. And considering the fact that you can only draw from apprentices, and you know that these T'Chakans are drawing off of not only multiple slaves in some cases, but also every person that they kill along the way. There's a moment later in a POV with Tessia where she's, like, falling asleep and having trouble because she's realizing that, like, the Kyralian magicians are all so intent on not having an outright war with T'Chaka because they know they could never win. So they have to sort of cut this off as soon as they possibly can, because otherwise they are completely screwed. And yeah, Tessia, that is the correct thing to wonder about. And the fact, like, I hate that what Takato is saying here. It's a real trope, to have, like, a villain who deeply underestimates their enemy because they hold in contempt whatever it is their enemy is fighting with. For example, Voldemort talking about Harry Potter's being defended by love and how bullshit that is. And of course, it's something he doesn't understand, and it winds up being his undoing because he doesn't really give that the respect it deserves. Takato is not having that problem. He isn't, like, contemptuous of what they are fighting with at the moment, because the Ichani are going to be using a lot of the same battle magic, I would imagine. He is correctly assessing the fact that these idiots just aren't ready and have not been, and underestimate the danger in general. And I hate that he's right about it. And I'm, like, 100% correct. It's just, what a bummer. And he says, the magicians are only allowed by law to take strength from apprentices, and many do not even have those. They are foolish and weak. Yo, they are, though. They are weak, and they are acting foolishly. Takato isn't wrong. The worst. And one of the Ichani expresses concern that the emperor might send somebody out to put all of them down. And Takato is like, that's why we need to make sure we're doing well, because then allies will start to flock to us, and there will be too many of us for him to do that. But we need to make sure that we stay on course. And there are certain people that'll join up with us because they just don't have anything else to do, and they just enjoy fighting. But others will need to hear that we are, like, victorious most of the time. And that word has to get out. This one guy, Dachito, does not completely get on board right away. He says, at this point, I am not the only one who believes Sachaka is in danger of turning on itself. Whether we act or not, we face conflict within. This may be what we need to minimize that. And I find that interesting. We face conflict within. Is that because of the exiles that have been happening? I'm not really sure what he's referencing here. I don't know if I'm supposed to know. Yeah, I might not. But Takato says, you see now why I, as an Ashaki, propose this. I am no outcast, but I'm not ashamed to fight with outcasts. I do this not just for my friends, but for all Sachaka. And that is a tactic, when your people are having trouble banding together. When I was in high school, a friend of mine got a fortune cookie that we took a photo of. I really wish that I had that photo. The fortune inside said, love, charity, and mutual respect do not unite allies as much as a common enemy. And it was just it was like the kind of fortune that you're just like, what the fuck? Like, it was such a bummer, really, to just be like, yeah, love's great, respect's great, all this is nice. Really, though, y'all have to hate the same person. We all have to hate somebody. That's what's going to do it. And it's so sad, but it's really true. And, this is something that I feel the GOP has really learned and weaponized in a way that is fucking lethal at the moment. And I wish that people would fucking get over it and learn that they're being manipulated and used, because that's 100% what's happening. And that's what Takato is doing. He's creating an enemy that they did not have because he knows that's going to keep everybody else quiet. As long as they can lash out at somebody, if it's not each other, then so be it. Sucks. The world is the worst. I hate it. So at one point, Takato asks for some raka, and it turns out Jokara is already on it and has it made. Takato doesn't say anything or notice. It seems like there's not really a good reason why Takato would take notice of the rivalry between two slaves. But I enjoy Hanara just kind of keeping an eye on this guy. Jakara is really smug about it, and also very young and kind of, what's the word? He's the up and comer, right? And Hanara watched and felt worry and resentment stir inside him. I'm real curious about this. I wonder if this isn't going to be a sort of an analogy for something else going on in the book. I'll be curious about that. We'll see. So then we go back to Tessia, and they finally arrive at Narvellin's. And I'm seeing in the chat that Nicola is here. Welcome, Nicola. We got a few people now. Nothing like a common enemy to unite people, Martin says exactly. So they are exhausted, and poor Narvellin is so guilty Like, just really is like, I came as soon as I could, but it was too late. Everything had happened already. And Tessia continues to watch Dakin and admire the fact that he is not blaming his friend. He is doing his best to put himself in his shoes and realize there's no way that Narvellan could have known. And even had he known, there really wouldn't be anything he could have done, more than likely all by himself up against an Ichani who is like powered up off of the lives of a bunch of people. It still wouldn't really have managed. He probably couldn't have mitigated the damage even. He would have just died, and then Takata would have gone on and done what he did. And I like that Tessia is realizing, because it's so easy. Guys, growing up is hard. It's so easy when you're young to take it for granted that somebody is like kind and reasonable and believes the best of their friends. And when you run into people, like after you, I don't even want to say after you start to get older, because some of us, those are the people we live with, are the ones that aren't reasonable. But we'll read stories and things or watch movies of people behaving well, being noble, fairy tales, superhero stories, comics, whatever. And we kind of take for granted that people are going to act that way. And then you get out there and you start to be like, oh my God, no, everybody's awful. And that's sort of what's happened to Tessia. She has grown up with Dakin as her lord, with parents who, while she didn't agree with her mother on plenty of things, they were good, decent people. And just sort of took for granted that that's just how you be as a person. You know, like that's just how you be. And then she starts to see that there are folks out there with the kind of power that Dakin has, and they don't care about their people, or at least it is a complete afterthought. And they are really much more concerned about the politics of keeping their positions or rising above a rival socially. And so now every time she sees Dakin behave in a way that reminds her he's an unusually good guy, it sort of warms her heart a little bit. And I really understand what that's like. And she notices also that Narvellan, who's fairly young, is being called my friend by Dakin. That Dakin mentions his clever mind and realizes all of this stuff that Dakin has said indicates a deep respect for Narvellan, she trusts Dakin. So the fact that he is respectful of this guy, in her opinion, bodes well. And Narvellan does not have his own apprentice and is saying, I have to do something about that. But seems like he's not super excited about the concept of doing it. And Tessia isn't really sure what that's about, and we don't find out this section. I'm assuming he is a little afraid or feels like not ready to take on somebody as a because, you know, when you are teaching somebody, you have to feel like you are an authority, that you deserve the respect that student is giving you, and that you know enough to really command the pathway of learning that this person is embarking on. And it seems maybe Narvellan does not have that confidence. Also, maybe taking magic from an apprentice is something that he feels a little weird about. I don't know. It's a hard thing because really it feels like I could see that if you came from another culture that did not take magic, you could see that as being really like invasive. But Narvellan is part of this culture, and this is widely accepted here. So, you know, he may just be an outlier who, despite culture, doesn't really feel cool about it. But that is an unusual thing to run across. Somebody who grew up with something that's acceptable, seeing it and being like, that's not right or good. So, and he tells them that there's like a couple of scouts that have been killed. Like, this is just really not going well. They go inside and they eat and are like practically falling asleep. And poor Tessia is sitting there like, she is starving, so she's eating, but she's also like having trouble staying awake and also struggling against crying because she keeps thinking about her parents. And at this point, Jayan says something about like, if I know what you're feeling and if you need to talk about it, I'm here. And she sort of like rears up at that, which is understandable. When somebody says, I know how you feel, it's a really common gut reaction to be like, fuck you. No, you don't. Shut up. I do wish that she had asked about Jayan and his family, because she's like, oh, how do you know? You saw both your parents murdered, or they were murdered? And he like, she doesn't know that they weren't, so just like, don't say anything because you may make yourself look like a dumb. And while that's not exactly the case with him, what it was terrible enough that it makes her feel ashamed anyway. He tells her that his mother got really sick and his father would not let her see a healer and wouldn't pay for any of the cures she needed. Does your father letting your mother die count? And both of them are very like irritated with one another. Him that she just bit his head off when he was trying to be kind to her, and her at the fact that she just embarrassed herself. And I really want some more backstory on what's going on with Jayan, because I asked last episode about his mother. I was like, he returned home. He's got memories of his mom. It's not specifically said that she's dead, but I assumed that she was because he doesn't see her. This is really tough. I would love to know the reasoning behind this, because he says wouldn't pay for any cures she needed. So I'm assuming this means that he is like tight-fisted and didn't want to spend the money. Excuse me. It might be because he doesn't trust healers for some reason, or he thought that they were like just going to do a bunch of kind of like mumbo jumbo that wouldn't actually help and ripping him off. I don't know. But I have some experience with this. With a parent refusing to care for somebody that they were obligated to care for. And it really does change your entire perception of that person forever, and makes it feel almost like they are dead. Not dead, but your idea of who they were has died. And now they are someone that you feel like you don't know. And in that regard, Jayan has the right, I think, to tell her he knows how she feels. But anyway, so they go out and they have to sleep outside because there's just not room in the house. But because they have spells that they can put up to sort of protect themselves from the weather and stuff, it's pretty much better. It's not better than being inside, but it's better for them than it would be for an ordinary person to sleep outside. And she's sort of thinking to herself, like, is Jayan, does his dislike for her stem from the fact that she is a healer? And she feels like it doesn't make sense. His dislike would make more sense if she was somebody who didn't believe in healers. But if she is a healer and that's what his mother needed, then surely he would approve. And just kind of has this weird like moment of maybe I should just let him be nice, but I feel weird about it. It seems like there has to be a reason that he is doing this, and she just can't wrap her mind around maybe he's just trying to be better than he was before. And that's understandable, because you don't want to let yourself fall into that trap sometimes of thinking somebody's genuinely trying, because that might not necessarily be what's happening, and then you get disappointed. So the next day, they get up early and they head out, and they're like trying to get to the next lay, and they're passing through villages with just, there are buildings that have been broken open and their bodies, it is pretty grim. A lot of them, the people have already fled and the place is just empty. And it's just a really sad state of affairs that they are this isn't just the common people. Dakin doesn't have a home. He is there. His place was destroyed and all of his servants were killed as well. So in a lot of ways, it's for him similar to how it is for Tessia, where those people were his family. They were servants that he had grown up with and known his entire life and really cared about. And it's affecting him as much as it's affecting common people, which is a pretty rare thing in war, So they collect people along the way and start to sort of form a bit of a caravan. And some people are acting as if they feel kind of guilty about what happened, as if they could have done something about it. And Tessia is just guys, there is nothing you could have done. And she says, he was scathing in his assessment of Hanara, though, saying the man had run off to join his master. But nobody had seen Hanara return to the village with Takato, so Tessia suspected he'd done no worse than the stable boy had, fled to save himself. She wondered where he was now. With news of a Sachakan attack spreading, it was unlikely anyone would take him in. So Tessia doesn't get it. She does not understand the way this works and doesn't believe that he would go back to his master because he's finally free and that guy was terrible. And they reach this slope and they are coming to another village and have sent people ahead to let them know. And the village master here is named Cranon. And even though he's the village master, he doesn't live in a manor the way that Dakin did. It's a house that's barely larger than Tessia's was. And the way that things go with Tessia, if she hadn't slipped away, hoping to impress her father, would she have discovered her ability anyway? Lord Dakin believed so, but maybe it wouldn't have happened until much later. Maybe she would have still been in the village when Takato attacked. Maybe she would be dead. And from Tikin's description, probably taken and used by Takato or one of his allies beforehand. But I guess it's likely I'd have reacted the same way and used magic to defend myself. Only he wouldn't have left me alive after using magic against him, and I'd have been too weak and unschooled to save myself. So she realizes that if she hadn't discovered her magic when she had, she would have been there and would have died. And in some ways, this saved her life. But then she thinks about what if Dakin just hadn't gone off and tried to meet up with other magicians and stayed in town. Tikin hadn't been sure how many magicians had attacked Mandarin, but there had been more than Takato. He'd run away to hide after seeing only 2 of them, but he was sure there had been more than that. Dakin was just one magician. 2 Sachakan magicians could have defeated him easily if they'd prepared themselves by storing lots of power from their slaves. Once he was dead, Takato and his allies would have gone on to slaughter the villagers anyway. She and her family would still be dead. So every situation that she thinks through, there's no other way this could have gone once the Sachakans decided to attack. They are just the superior force at this point. So she wakes up and the servants are preparing a meal and she feels weird and wants to help and nobody will let her. And the servant is asking Tessia, what do you think the magicians will do? And Tessia assumes kill the Sachakans. And of course she would assume that. Why wouldn't you assume that? But once she talks later to Dakin, he makes it clear that that's not how they want to handle this. because not all of the Sechakans are Ichani. They're not all outcasts. And even if they were, they're still Sechakans, and killing a group would be considered an act of war. Now, I understand in principle that this is true. But he says when they did nothing worse than kill a few commoners. And it's so much more than a few commoners. And it's so clear that they are ramping up to something bigger. And it really, what it comes down to is they are smaller and weaker and don't want to start a fight if they can avoid it. And it comes across as really sad and cowardly. It's because of their methods and their weakness, really the only option that they can go with at the moment. But oh my God, it's sort of humiliating to just have to roll over and take it that these people sauntered in and killed your villager and your servants and destroyed your home. And you just have to sort of be like, well, as long as you leave and say you'll never do it again, I guess you can go. Oh my fucking God. Like, guys. Oh, makes me so crazy. Just. Y'all. It's just embarrassing. I hate it. So, at this point, some lords show up. Some magicians. And they have apprentices with them and servants. So there are some other apprentices that Tessia begins to hang out with. And it's really notable that she is the only woman among them. And while a female magician is not unheard of, the fact that she is from a fairly common family is definitely unheard of. Like, it's just something that happens really, really rarely. So she doesn't fit in, and they almost dismiss her initially, like thinking that she's not part of their group. And she also like bathed in the house and had to borrow clothes, and the clothes are like way too big for her and just look like she's wearing hand-me-downs. So they're also going by how she is dressed. And as this continues on, they begin to grow more interested in her because she is fairly good looking. She is a magician, and they know, while she does not, that she can prevent pregnancy. So apparently, a lot of women magicians are more adventurous when it comes to sleeping around because they are aware that there isn't going to be that kind of consequence. And Tessia doesn't realize that this is an option. Like, the fact that you can just fucking prevent pregnancy with your magic is news to her. And I assume that finding this out is going to be the impetus for her realizing magic can be used for healing. Because it's bananas that they know that and can do that. And nobody has thought to use magic in another application with the human body other than general, like the physical aspects of like holding things open or heating or cooling or whatever. They are able to use magic to get inside a womb and prevent a pregnancy. But nobody's tried to use magic to get inside somebody's heart and reset an arrhythmia or unblock an artery or any number of other things, set a bone properly. Like, the idea that they are like completely fine with that, but it hasn't been pushed in other directions is bananas to me. Martin says, I think it's mentioned early on that the Healers Guild lobbies against using magic for healing. Was it? I don't even remember a Healers Guild being mentioned, if I'm being honest. But it's been a minute since I read the very start of the book, so it could have happened and I just forgot. But I don't remember that at all. I have to be honest. But yeah, so like, I hope that she starts to find, Martin says it's where they go for the autopsy. Okay. The healers. When you say healers guild, I hear the word guild and I'm putting them in the same department as magicians. So I'm thinking the healers guild is magicians, but the healers guild is not necessarily magicians. Those are ordinary people. Some of them may also be magicians. I get where the confusion came from there. Okay. So they don't approve of it. Okay. So, Tessia, go on and do your shit. Who cares what they approve of? Fuck them. Like, this is idiotic. You don't just not use an amazing tool at your disposal because some idiot decided that they don't like it. Shut up. I hope she does. So Giant and she are like left aside to not take part in the conversation again as the lords go off to talk about what they're going to do. And this is a ritual that winds up happening over and over in these chapters, is all the lords sort of like separating from the rest of the group and kind of going around and around in circles talking about the same things. And he says, I'm not sure how much Dakin wants people to know. Giant says. And he's about to kind of get into that with her when they are interrupted by a gentleman who noticed the healer's bag that she had and is looking for the healer, is looking for her father. And when she tells him that he's died, he looks really upset and starts to just leave. And she's like, wait, do you not have a healer? And he says no and looks really upset. And she's like, I was my dad's assistant. I could probably, I mean, I don't know what I can do, but I can take a look and see and maybe make a recommendation. He's like, okay, yeah, like we don't have anybody. So go ahead. Let's do this. And she starts to walk away and Giant is like, dude, what are you doing? You can't be running off like this. You're an apprentice. He didn't tell you that this was okay. It's not appropriate. And she's like, you know what, Giant, how about you go over there and be a good boy who does not apparently have any worthwhile skills, and let the people who have something to contribute to making the world better and taking people's suffering away get on with their shit without your fucking interference. All right? She doesn't say that, but practically she's thinking it. We know she's thinking it. So finally he says that he's going to come with her. And she goes and examines this woman. And it turns out that she has been, the wife has been chewing this leaf that has given her essentially a tumor in her mouth, a growth that is blocking off her air passage, that is making it difficult to eat. It is making it impossible almost nearly to speak. And she has lost a ton of weight because of that. She's super thin. And when Tessia looks inside her mouth, she can tell, like, immediately knows what it is. And she's like, I can cut this out. And you're going to have to use this like horrible tasting mouthwash. But if you continually do that, it will keep the cut that I sew up from basically getting infected. And also, you need to stop chewing that shit because it will literally kill you. And when she says this, the woman kind of gives her a look like she's going to argue with Tessia about it. And Tessia just stares at her because she knows she can't say anything beyond it'll kill you. And let the woman think for a second about the fact that she has a giant fucking lump growing in her mouth. Like, if this woman doesn't understand and listen because of this, then nothing's going to work. But finally, the woman sort of like her expression softens and her husband is like, yeah, I will make sure that she doesn't chew this shit anymore. And she has to make sure that the lump is something that could be easily removed because sometimes they have grown so firm that they are really embedded in the flesh or the bone even, and removing them leads to them dying a lot more quickly. But this one moves around, and she knows that she'll be able to take it off. So she does this, and Jayan is watching, and she's a little bit worried initially because she's ordering them around like, I need you to lay this way. I need you to put some basins under the bed. I need you to cover this with like some towels or old sheets that you don't care get blood on them. And they're listening and doing exactly what she says, which makes her sort of stop and be like, oh God, I really don't entirely know what I'm doing. And the fact that they are immediately jumping to anything I say means that they don't really know that, and they are depending on me like entirely. And that kind of gives her pause, you know. But eventually she gets so involved with her work that she kind of forgets Jayan's even there, because initially she's worried he's coming with her and she's not even going to be able to help this woman, and she's going to look like a bit of an idiot. But it turns out that it went really all right. It was not easy, but nothing unexpected or disastrous happened either. After half an hour, she had coaxed out the lump, sewn up the cut, and applied a protective paste. Then she checked the woman's rhythms again and pronounced her work a success. As the woman rolled onto her back, exhausted from pain and fear, Tessia rose and swayed, suddenly dizzy with weariness. And Jayan is like, yo, here, take this stool, sit down. Like, so she gives them the mouthwash, and the husband is about to pay her, and she's like, oh, whoa, no. I cannot accept that. Like, first of all, I'm not really a healer. I just have some training. Second of all, I'm an apprentice, and I know my master would not approve of this. And he's like, well, then I need to pay you back somehow. And she's like, we're already living here and eating your food. I'm pretty sure we're good. And he's like, all right, how about I just give you like a really fat chicken for dinner? And she's like, all right, you know what? Yes, that I definitely want. And Jayan tells her that he's impressed, and she can't help but say, it just looked impressive, but it was simple, really. Routine work. Ah, he said, in a tone that was too accepting. No, it wasn't simple, she wanted to say. I don't know why I said that. But his attention had moved away to the apprentices, and even if she could think of a way to correct herself without sounding a fool, it was too late to try. Yo, I'm telling you guys, it's I don't know how many of you men out there are aware how much women are taught to minimize their accomplishments and make it sound as if it's not a big deal. But it is just so ingrained that we don't even realize we're doing it. We don't even realize the language we're choosing when we're like, oh, it was just, oh, it only, well, it's not a big deal. Like everything that we say is meant to sort of make it seem like it's almost accidental that we succeeded at things. And while I do not deny luck has tons to do with success, way more than anybody wants to admit, it's also skill, and there is a perfectly rational reason to take pride in what you do because you have a skill and you've trained and worked to perfect it, you know? So anyway, they are, she has this like moment of maybe being able to like see eye to eye with Jayan, and then it sort of like goes away. And then they have the conversation with Dakin. The whole thing is just such a bummer. And Dakin, while he wants revenge for his people, can't help but like understand where the king is coming from with taking this tactic. Then we go to a new POV. Chapter 21 is a character named Stara, who's half Eileen, is that how you say it? And half Sachakan. Her mother's from Eileen and her father is a Sachakan. And he is a slaveholder and very wealthy. And apparently her parents met in Eileen and fell in love, and like they had their children, and then they eventually moved to Shchaka, and her mother could not get over the change in her husband once he was around his slaves, and did not like the person that he was in Shchaka. And he kind of tried to be like, this is how you have to be when you live here. I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is the way it is. And she moves back to Eileen without her husband and leaves him there and takes her daughter with her, but leaves her son with him. And Stara is very interested in doing trading. She's super good at sales. She's really quick with math. She has a lot of skills. And her father had always said that he would send for her one day. And she'd sort of started to give up hope. But she's developed so many skills that when he calls her back, she assumes he's doing it because he wants to involve her in the trade that he makes his money from. And unfortunately, that is not the case. She gets to the house, and there is a series, and I don't have a ton of time left, but there is a series of moments where she realizes how different the culture is here, because she is not, in Eileen, being a woman and being younger would make her somebody who is to be ordered around, even by other servants a little bit, because they are meant to be like keeping watch over her. But here, because all of these people are slaves, regardless of her age and regardless of her sex, she is the mistress, and they will do whatever she tells them. So there's a lot of moments of her sort of standing and waiting for somebody to tell her to do something, and somebody has to be like, nobody's going to tell you, ma'am. You have to choose something. And she realizes that, like, they're all standing around waiting for her instruction. And when she goes to her father, it becomes really clear he does not want her here because of the skills that she has learned. He wants her here because he plans to marry her off and make a really good match because of it. And she's disgusted. And he can see that as much as he still plans to do exactly what he planned, that he's going to have to warm her up to the idea and take it a little slower. That telling her outright is not the way he probably should have handled this. And she's like, oh, and you definitely didn't tell Mom, because if she knew that's what this was about, she wouldn't have sent me here either. Also, there's a moment where she's thinking about how she talked to her brother, who she has lost a lot of like her familiarity with because of this distance. And she says something about missing her father and saying, I'm sure you miss Mother as well. And it says he'd sneeringly told her it didn't matter as much for a man to grow up without women around, as they weren't as important as men. Which is definitely something that a lot of people still believe. You hear so much about fatherless families because not having a father is seen as some sort of catastrophe. But when a man is raising his children alone, he is not seen as the reason that the mother left or there's nothing like that. It's always nothing but, what a good dad doing it all by himself and getting all this, just so lauded. So that mindset, as gross as it is 100% still in force with the majority of Americans. And it says she lost a lot of respect for him that day. The expectation that he would feel the same way about her as he did about other women, especially in regard to her value in the trade, soured the anticipation and excitement of finally reaching her destination. So this is really something that she's like, I knew you didn't like most women, but the fact that you feel that way about me too. And that is like so annoying in a way that, like, oh, you can think that way about them, but you shouldn't think that way about me. I'm different. And I'm like, no, he shouldn't think that way at all. But all right, whatever, go off. And yeah, her meeting up with her father just does not go well. And he winds up screaming at her to sit down. And eventually one of the nurses that took care of her as a child comes up and leads her away to her rooms. And she doesn't recognize the woman at all, and had kind of expected there to be some more familiar faces than there is. And she's kind of feeling alone. And then we go back to Tessia, and this is when they come across the house with like one guy who is still barely alive because a lot of his strength has been taken. She asks Dakin, can you give him some of yours and keep him alive? But before he can even try it, the guy dies. And Dakin agrees that if they come across somebody else like this again, he'll try. And she really appreciates that he's saying this. And they have this moment with the other apprentices whom Jayan can see are all flirting with her and trying to see, like, who can get in with her first. And she doesn't know that's what's happening. And he finally comes up and sort of warns her after some guy is, like, all over her mickin'. And she realizes, and she goes and talks to them all and is like, hey, FYI, I'm not fucking any of you. Like, just so you know, that's absolutely not happening. And this is when she finds out that you can stop a pregnancy or prevent a pregnancy with magic. And they are thinking about the fact that they don't really know how to protect themselves very well. And Jayan offers to help teach her, which is against the rules in ordinary circumstances. But of course, because they aren't fucking morons, all the apprentices assume that those rules will be relaxed because of what's fucking happening. But no, they all get together and start training one another. And then all the magicians notice and like come flying over and are like, what are you doing? This is against the rules. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, you are so gonna lose. Stop ruining every chance you have, you fucking idiots. And they go off and start debating that, and I'm just like, guys, no, I hate this. And then lastly, we meet up with Hanara again, and they wind up catching up with this guy named Dovaka, who is very violent and just kind of a twisted person. And the Sachakans, to think that somebody is very excessively violent, that really is very terrible. And Takado is irritated because Dovaka was supposed to meet him somewhere else and just kind of didn't do that, but is hiding it because he's trying to keep his allies. And Hanara can see, like, Dovaka has intercepted a messenger from the Emperor who had been intending to send out magicians to take all these guys down. And he convinces the messenger to throw in with them, because otherwise he goes back to the Emperor and tells the Emperor, hey, my bad, I got intercepted and they totally read your message. Then he's definitely going to die. Like, so he may as well stay here and throw in with them and like do his best and maybe wind up with some land. And Hanara is watching Takado while he's binding up this guy's wound, and thinks he's not going to have an easy time keeping Dovaka and Nagana under control. Eventually, Dovaka is going to challenge Takado's authority, and when he does, I hope I'm a long way away. And that is the end of the chapters. So I'm over time and I have to wrap, but thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you again, Ashleigh, for this commission, and I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.